In this video, we introduce the perfect middle indicative and the perfect passive indicative, as well as the future middle indicative of the Koine Greek verbal system. So as you have heard me say time and time again, and I'm going to keep saying it, Greek is a highly inflected language. It's going to change its forms of words, both verbs and nouns, based on what they're doing in a sentence. We have seen a lot in the past of this class how this happens with verbs with respect to tense. In the last video, we introduced how it happens with respect to voice, in the middle voice and in the passive voice, particularly in the present tense. And in this video, we're going to move over to the future tense, namely the future middle. We'll get to the future passive indicative later on. So in the future tense, the middle and the passive have different forms, but then also the perfect tense. And the perfect tense is going to have the same middle and passive forms, just like the present tense did. So that you have to determine by context whether you have a perfect middle or a perfect passive, because they'll look identical to one another. So by way of reminder here, these are our primary middle and passive forms that you memorized for the last video. And when it comes to the present middle and passive, they look like this here. The present middle and passive look identical to one another, so that luomai, or in the example here, balomai, I throw myself in the middle, or I am being thrown, the passive voice, look exactly the same. Or I am loosing myself in the middle, or I am being loosed in the passive, are both going to look like luomai. And we noted the changes between this psi and the a over here, that there were, that as a result of the combination of the connecting vowel epsilon with this psi ending, the sigma dropped out. It doesn't like to be between two vowels. That caused the epsilon to lengthen to an eta when it comes into contact with the alpha. So the alpha goes away, epsilon goes to an eta, and the iota likes to subscript under a long vowel, so that we get the eta with the iota subscript underneath it. Things are going to look a little bit different when we come to the perfect middle and passive, especially in this second singular, where you see the psi is actually retained from these endings that you are memorizing onto the paradigm itself. And the reason for this is that you'll see here in the way that the perfect middle passive forms, there is no connecting vowel here. The primary middle passive suffixes are added directly onto the stem. So there's no omai here. It's just lelumai. And so just like the present middle and passive, the perfect middle and passive are going to look identical to one another, so that lelumai could be a present middle indicative first person singular, meaning I have loosed myself. So the I have comes from the perfect tense, which we see in the reduplication. And then the loosed myself comes from the middle voice, whereas the I have over here comes from the perfect tense, and the been loosed comes from the passive voice. And because no connecting vowel is used, we don't have those changes to the psi here, so that we have lelumai, lelusai, lelutai. And this is going to result in some changes, this fact of not having a connecting vowel being used, but usually, and these changes normally occur to verbs that end in consonants, but usually this is really, really recognizable, that you can really notice what the verb is based on the changes that occur. The changes aren't so drastic that you're left wondering, what is this verb? So for example here, if I were to give you this form, gay grammai, what would you think that this is the perfect middle or passive indicative first person singular of? Gay grammai. That's right, grapho. So that this double M is the result of the mai ending being stuck on to the grapho, and this extra M is there, the phi is gone, but you can really easily tell that this comes from grapho, that it's not a far step. So for this reason, we're not going to address the kind of changes that happen in here, because there's lots of them, and they're not addressed in black either. There's lots of changes that occur, but normally they're very recognizable. And so our next one to introduce here is the future middle indicative. So this is not future middle and passive indicative, just future middle indicative. Later on, we'll see the future passive indicative, which has a different form. But the future middle indicative is going to be formed by using the stem, adding that sigma tense formative that's characteristic of the future tense, adding the connecting vowel, and then adding those primary middle passive suffixes that you are memorizing. So that the result is you have lucemi, luce, lusatai, lusamatha, luceste, lusantai. So the notice here that we have those changes happening in the second person singular. So as I've noted twice over now, this is the third time I'm going to say it, the future middle and the future passive have separate forms. So this is not the future passive indicative first person singular. This is only the first person singular future middle indicative. And then notice again that we have those same changes occurring in the second person singular, that the connecting vowel epsilon, when combined with that psi ending, goes to A. And then the last thing to introduce here paradigm-wise, and one of the other things that you're being asked to memorize for this week, and sorry I have this out of order here, let's get that up there, is the future indicative of eİmī. And remember that eİmī verbs don't have voice, so we're just dealing with the future indicative of eİmī. It's introduced this week because you'll notice that the endings used here are the primary middle passive endings. So even though these suffixes are the ones being used, we don't actually have middle or passive voice when it comes to eİmī because the being or existence isn't active or passive. It doesn't take a voice at all. So our formation here is our stem, the epsilon, with the sigma added. It's characteristic of the future, a connecting vowel in the case of omicron, and then the lost epsilon here, no connecting vowel with tai. And then omicron, epsilon, omicron over here, and then these endings. Excuse me, I thought I had one more thing there. So this is our formation of the future indicative of eİmī, and then once you have memorized this paradigm, you have memorized all of the paradigms of the to be verbs. So you're in pretty good shape there. Oh yes, and so I say right here, notice that there is no connecting vowel used in the third person singular. So this is a case where that tai ending is just added straight on to the epsilon with the sigma tense formative here. And so what we're going to do here, as we did for our last video, is sort of do a recap quiz of what I've just told you here, and also of what you read in black. So some of this will not maybe have been explicitly mentioned here, but it will provide us not only a chance to review, but also a chance for me to make a few comments on sort of some of the leftovers from the black grammar that you're reading for this particular lesson. So go ahead and pause the video, and on your whiteboard, go ahead number 1 to 10 and just give the true false for each one of these here while I go ahead and mark them myself as well. All right, and here are our answers. Let's go through each one really quick. The future middle and passive are formed the same way. This is false. The future passive is going to have a different form than the future middle. Unlike the perfect middle and the perfect passive and the present middle and the present passive, so this one is true, they are formed the same way. A postpositive word or conjunction always occurs first in a Greek clause or sentence. That is false. It will never occur first. So postpositive means it will not be in positive position. It will not stand first in a sentence, but usually will stand as the second word in a sentence or a clause. Number 4, adverbs are often formed with an os ending. That is true. This is sort of one of the characteristic ways adverbs are formed, so that when you see this ending at the end of the word, you usually will expect to be dealing with an adverb. Then mende, both of these are true. It can be used to express both contrast and the sense of some and others. And so what you'll see is usually a clause with men and then a clause with de that follows it. So this ellipsis here indicates words that are going to go with men, and then you're going to have words that are also going to go with de to indicate a contrast. So oftentimes this gets translated on the one hand, on the other hand, and then also some others. And then all future tense forms of eİmī contain a connecting vowel. This is false. The third person singular does not. It adds that tie ending right onto the S, the epsilon sigma. The Greek perfect middle passive indicative is formed with reduplication. That is true. Reduplication is going to be a characteristic of the perfect tense. Amalgamation may occur in the future middle indicative. This is true. We did not address this in this video, but if you remember back to the way that when a sigma is added to certain consonants, there will be changes that occur to that consonant. We saw that in the future active indicative. We didn't look at it with the future middle passive indicative, but it also happens in the future middle passive indicative. So be on the lookout for that S sound, even when it doesn't appear strictly as a sigma. And then number 10 here, the perfect middle and passive indicative uses a connecting vowel. This is false. So the perfect does not use a connecting vowel, but rather just sticks those primary middle passive endings right onto the verb stem here. So if this is what yours looked like, let's go ahead and do a high five. 1, 2, 3, high five. If not, we're going to mix them up and do it again. So even if you got them all right, it will behoove you to do this again for memory's sake. So these are mixed up, same true or false questions. Let's go ahead and do them again. You pause the lecture, then do them, and I will on my end mark the right answers here. All right, yours should look something like this. We have true, false, false, false, true, false, true, true, true, true. So once again, if you've got them right here, or even if you didn't get them all right, that's okay too. Let's go ahead and high five on 3. 1, 2, 3, boom. And on to a couple of practice examples here. So what I want you to do is, in this first time, identify the middle passive voice. This should not say tense. This should say voice. My apologies, typo. I'll read it for us. Hutas u be baptistai eis ton ieson soon. Excuse me. So which verb here is going to be middle or passive? And now that you have figured out that it is be baptistai, is it going to be, what tense is it going to be in? And this be here is going to be our strong hint. We have reduplication, so it is going to be a perfect tense verb. Next, what is the subject of our perfect tense verb, be baptistai, going to be? It's going to be with the demonstrative in the nominative case, hutos. So this one, or this man. And let's go back to our verb over here. And the question is going to be, is this a middle or a passive verb? So we identified be baptistai as the perfect verb. Let's figure out whether it is middle or whether it is passive. This is a somewhat tricky one, but we are probably going to have a passive rather than a middle. So this one has not been baptized. We normally think of baptism as something that happens to a person, so if it were middle, it would have to be translated. This one has not baptized himself into Jesus. Sort of a bad example of a preposition, or an odd example, I should say, of a prepositional phrase, into Jesus. This is from Black himself. So if we were to translate it, sort of, this one has not been baptized into Jesus. So our tense is probably, or our voice, excuse me, is probably going to make most sense as passive voice, even though we don't have any agency expressed. We don't have hupa or dia or a dative that follows. We don't have any kind of agency that sometimes we see with a passive. This is a case where we have a passive voice verb with no agency expressed. So we might think this is a divine passive. This one has not been baptized by the Lord into Jesus. So the divine passive is the unstated divine being, the Lord doing the action. So let's do another quick practice here. We have gnosko ton theon kai egnosmai hup autou. So the question is, which verb is in the passive voice? Go ahead and pause and see if you can determine which verb's in the passive. So it's going to be egnosmai, and we have gnosko as a second or another verb in the sentence, but this my ending is going to tell us that we have the passive. And then the next question is going to be, what tense do we have egnosmai in here? So egnosmai is going to be a perfect tense verb. So this is an occasion, remember, when a gamma nu, that combination of vowels, begins a word, the reduplication is going to be in the form of an epsilon. So this epsilon is actually reduplication, indicating the perfect tense here. So we have a perfect tense verb. And then the next question, what is the subject of egnosmai, and who is doing the action of the verb here? So what's the subject and who's doing the action? So our subject is going to come from, actually from gnosko. So we don't have any explicit subject here. Notice that both of these are first person singular. So I know, ton theon, I know God, and I have been known. So the perfect translation, have from the perfect there, and then been known from the passive. So we have a passive voice. I tell you that in the question itself. And we also know it's passive because of the prepositional phrase indicating direct agency, hup autou, by him. So this pronoun autou in the genitive is the one that is the direct agent, the one doing the action. So I have been known. So it is him that is doing the knowing, and the him is actually referring to the antecedent God. So remember, a pronoun is going to match its antecedent in gender and in number. So we have a masculine singular here to go with our masculine singular theon. In this case, theon is accusative here, and over here it's in the genitive case because it's following the preposition hup, indicating agency. So to repeat our answers here, our verb in the passive voice is egnosomai. It's a perfect tense verb, so perfect passive indicative, first person singular. The subject of the egnosomai is I, that's contained within both verbs. It's an implicit subject. So I have been known by autou, by him. He, namely God, is doing the knowing, is the doing the action of the passive tense verb.